Story 1. Spanish. I live in the United States and I'm tired of being the only one in the room who can't understand the gossip. Story 2. Spanish. Also, I am Hispanic, but my parents never really fully taught me. I would be able to communicate better with family and friends, and it is a plus when looking for a job. Story 3. Many of us can already speak 2 languages. However, if I could speak fluently a language that I currently do not, it would be the ones I spent several years studying in school but do not speak fluently. I would feel that my years learning them at school were better spent. Story 4. Does American Sign Language count? I tried to learn it in college during the COVID-19 pandemic when everything was online and barely passed. Now I work with individuals with disabilities, some of whom use sign language because they are deaf or nonverbal. I also have a coworker who is deaf. I want to learn, but it has been very hard for me for some reason. As far as spoken languages go, Spanish. I took it in high school and fell in love with the language and culture, but I had a bad teacher in college who ruined it for me. Story 5. Mandarin is considered one of the hardest languages to learn. It is the most spoken language in the world after English. Additionally, I want to travel to China. Story 6. Korean. I have been teaching myself for what feels like an eternity, but I struggle with grammar. I need an actual teacher. Story 7. The Lisu language is a Tibeto-Burman language spoken by the Lisu ethnic group. They originate in China and live in Thailand, Myanmar, and parts of India. I married into a Lisu family, and it has been nearly impossible for me to learn the language on my own because I want to hear the family gossip. Story 8. Spanish is very practical in my workplace and in everyday life, especially in the good to curious. It would also be helpful to learn a few words of Russian. I work in logistics, and there are many native Russian speakers driving trucks in this country. Story 9. Chinese is probably one of the hardest languages to master as a second language. I also enjoy much of their literature, and it would be nice to read it in the original language. Story 10. German because I've always wanted to speak it, but ideally Spanish because a lot of people come into my work who speak it, and it is hard to communicate, especially in a medical setting. Story 11. There are many people who are native Spanish speakers in my neighborhood, and I have been trying really hard to learn. However, it is progressing very slowly. Story 12. I already know Spanish and English, which would have been my first choice if I did not. I would choose Cantonese or Japanese. I would love to live in Tokyo or Hong Kong. Story 13. Spanish. I live in Texas. It would guarantee me an extra $1 per hour at most jobs in my industry, open up many more job opportunities, and enable me to communicate more easily with 30% of all people I interact with. Honestly, maybe I should actually learn Spanish. Story 14. Spanish, I know some, but native speakers speak so quickly that I have problems understanding them. I live in Southern California, and we have many Spanish speakers. Story 15. Vietnamese. I want to be able to talk to my parents and grandmother. I could learn a lot more and have deeper conversations with them that I am not able to have right now. Story 16. French. I am Canadian, and it would open more job opportunities or allow me to travel and have a common language in other multilingual countries. Story 17. Spanish. Trying to teach it to my daughter. I can understand it about 70 to 80% of the time, but my pronunciation is poor. Story 18. Korean. My mother is Korean, and she would be thrilled if I could speak Korean fluently. It would also help me understand that side of my heritage. Story 19. Mandarin. Because if I am going to live under an authoritarian government, it might as well be one that is trying to improve the economy. Story 20. Etruscan or Minoan Linear A basically revolutionized our understanding of the Bronze Age in a single stroke. Story 21. German, because I sing classical music and I find German opera and art songs to be the best. Additionally, Germany actually pays opera singers. Story 22. Chinese. More work opportunities or business opportunities. My colleagues who are able to speak Chinese fluently receive higher salaries and are more likely to find new jobs quickly. Story 23. Hawaiian because I would love to learn a unique language that very few know. I also admire their culture. Story 24. I'm from Texas, so Spanish would make communicating a lot easier. I would also like to walk into my favorite taco place and just be able to speak it. They know me pretty well. I have gone there almost every week for 10 years, so that would be funny. Story 25. Gullah, also known as Gullah Geechee, is the fastest dying language in the world. I know a few words, but not the full language. Story 26. Spanish for sure. I am a social worker in the Los Angeles area, and I would have many more job opportunities if I did. Story 27. I already speak some Spanish, having studied it for 3 years in school, along with many visits to Mexico. I am currently learning Hawaiian. Story 28. Irish, because most people do not even speak Irish anymore, including in Ireland, so it would be interesting to speak it just to surprise people. Story 29. Spanish is the second most spoken language I encounter. It would greatly help me and those around me who speak Spanish if I knew the language, both in work and personal life. Story 30. My boyfriend's mother tongue is Bengali, so his mom can speak to me fluently. I would tell my boyfriend to learn a third language, such as Spanish, German, or French, to help us when we travel or for work. Story 31. My daughter-in-law is German, and she will be teaching my grandchildren German, so I would love to be fluent in it. I tried learning, but my brain is too old to absorb new information. Alas. Story 32. Japanese, just imagine watching animated shows without subtitles and ordering ramen in Tokyo like a local. Dream combination. Story 33. While I have been trying to learn Japanese for years, I feel like it is achievable. Spanish also seems doable. However, I do not think I stand a chance to learn Mandarin, so I guess I would pick that. It is probably one of the more useful languages for where I live. Story 34. Punjabi. One of my favorite bands has 2 singers and one sings in Punjab, so I would like to understand them better. Plus, I live in a very multicultural area where it would be useful. Story 35. I moved to Germany 6 years ago to do a Doctor of Philosophy and barely found the time to learn the language. I have now finished my Doctor of Philosophy and find myself living in this country for 6 years without being able to speak fluent or nearly fluent German. I managed to take 2 courses and practice on language learning apps every day, but that is not enough. I am now at an early B1 level, but I am far from fluent. Being fluent in German will make my life much better here, especially since I have a German boyfriend. I am lucky he is fluent in English, but I feel bad that I still have to rely on him when I have to make phone calls. Story 36. Hebrew or German. The first sounds interesting, but I would never learn it myself. The second also sounds interesting, but I am too lazy to learn it. Story 37. If you mean speak as in understanding meaning and syntax rules fluently, Latin is a good example. I am fairly good at it, but not as good as I would like. Can be helpful to know because French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian derive from it, and much of English vocabulary comes from Latin. In my limited experience, if you are more focused on Eastern languages, Mandarin makes the most sense. Not just because it is so widely spoken after English, but because it shares syntax with many Asian languages. For Russian, it helps you train your brain to learn different ways of thinking about words. Klingon is what 11-year-old me would choose. Story 38. Mandarin, specifically traditional Chinese characters. Japanese use the same characters for kanji, so with this you have a big portion of Japanese memorized for free. 60% of Korean vocabulary is based on Chinese roots, similar to how Latin influences French or Italian, so even if it is not strictly similar, some words are really close. Basically, 3 languages for the price of 1. Story 39. Japanese or Mandarin. Both are very popular and difficult for native English speakers to learn. I am learning Japanese because I have been there before, although I realize many more people speak Mandarin. Story 40. Spanish. My family is collectively learning Spanish on Duolingo, and I would just tease them by saying, "Yeah, it took me a couple of weeks to finish. How far along are you?" Story 41. Second language? What kind of monoglot defaultism is this? I want my 4th. It would be Dutch because that is where my girlfriend is from and where I want to move with her. Story 42. Assembly language, or possibly C. To be absolutely fluent in a low-level programming language would be fantastic. Story 43, Japanese. I want to trade the Nikkei better and understand Japanese news sources better. Also, I love Japan. Story 44. Japanese would come up for me a lot. It would not help at work, but it would also help me watch many shows and movies more easily. Story 45. Spanish. We have a large Spanish-speaking population where I live, and I would love to be able to interact more. Story 46. I work with many native Spanish speakers, so part of me wants to say Spanish, but I have been trying to learn French, so I would say that. Story 47. Spanish. I work in construction. The little that I have learned has been useful. I cannot imagine what being fluent would be like. It would be amazing to be able to connect with my peers. Story 48. Smart answer. I live in a town with approximately 50% Hispanic and white population. I am not smart, so I would choose Japanese for that one trip I might take in my life. Story 49. Arabic. Almost my entire family speaks it except for me, my siblings, and cousins. I could speak a bit when I was a toddler, but the preschool teachers asked my parents to stop speaking to me in Arabic because they could not understand me. I understand and can speak some words, but I can never have a proper conversation. Story 50. Tell me you are from the United States of America without telling me you are from the United States of America. My fourth language would be either Swedish or Spanish. Story 51. Spanish. I live in Los Angeles. That would mean more job opportunities, being able to understand Latino friends and coworkers when they switch, being able to understand the entire menu at the taco truck, being able to understand all the Bad Bunny lyrics, and more. If you live in Los Angeles, then you understand. Story 52. Probably any of the extinct and undecipherable languages in the world, preferably those with significant value for historical research. Discovering hidden secrets of civilization through language is fascinating. As a bonus, I would challenge myself to write a book on how to understand and speak the language, to pass it on before I die. Edit. I just realized that reading was not mentioned. I automatically assumed it. Story 53. I would be torn between choosing Spanish, as it is relatively popular worldwide, and Japanese, since I consume a lot of their media and wish to visit that country in the future. English already feels like my native language due to the internet and work. Story 54. Irish. After all, according to the annals, it is the language spoken in heaven, so I would arrive already fluent. Story 55. English is my second language and I am fluent. In addition to the languages I know, I would like to learn Cantonese. It is too hard to learn, so I gave up long ago. Story 56. Your language, because then I could talk to you. Why would I want to talk to you? The world speaks no language. It just keeps going. Let me go too. Just playing around. Story 57. Spanish, I guess because it is the one I would be most likely to use in everyday life. After Spanish, Chinese. Story 58. Be fluent in Spanish again. I lost it after I stopped speaking it to learn German. However, I am now certified at the C1 level in German. Story 59. Spanish for sure. It is widely spoken, and the culture, music, and food are excellent. It would make travel much more enjoyable. Story 60. Irish. The pronunciation is very difficult to grasp from any other starting point. I think such a radical shift would unlock many more options as I continue to learn. Story 61. As my fourth fluent language, I would choose French. I already speak English and I live right on the French border. I vacation in France a lot. I also have an incredibly hard time learning it. Story 62. Spanish. I live in Southern California, in a city with a majority Latino population. Being fluent in Spanish would make it easier to communicate with more people around me. I took 3 years of Spanish in high school, but that was over 20 years ago in a state where I had few opportunities to use it. As a result, I have forgotten much of what I learned. Story 63. I am Canadian and worked hard throughout high school in French class. I have been to France 3 times and just came back today. I was able to get by with my broken French in the northern regions. I am looking to buy a cottage there in the next 10 years and am currently studying more to communicate easily with the locals using basic conversation. I study German because I used to live in Germany with an ex-boyfriend who was German. I fell in love with the country and language. I think it is an extremely cool language. From the German language school I attended there, I would love to keep up with it. Story 64. Even though there is not much practical purpose, I think it would be cool to be able to speak German just because I like the language. Story 65. Probably Spanish, just so I know what my supervisor and his spouse are saying sometimes and the occasional customer. Story 66. Russian. I've been learning it for 2 years on Duolingo, and all I can say is that my hedgehog is lying on the bridge near St. Petersburg. Story 67. I would choose Korean or Japanese. I have always been very interested in both cultures, from food, fashion, and traditions to music and shows. It would be amazing to understand Korean dramas or anime without subtitles and to connect with locals if I ever get the chance to visit. Plus, learning the language feels like a deeper way to appreciate everything I already love about Korea and Japan. Story 68. Definitely Arabic. Such a beautiful and expressive language to learn. I find it a bit more challenging than Mandarin or German. I want Arabic to be my second language so I can read the Quran effortlessly. Story 69. Chinese has always interested me since I was little. Being able to go into a Chinese restaurant and order in their language would be amazing. Story 70. Vietnamese, so I could finally know what my wife's mother and aunts are undoubtedly saying about me. Story 71. British Sign Language. I have been taking lessons for about 3 years, but I am still not very proficient. I am currently waiting for the results of my resit of one of the level 1 exams. Story 72. Basically, any language that has a different alphabet so I could try Russian, Mandarin, Japanese, Arabic, and so on. I would be excited if I woke up and didn't have to struggle with that. I tried learning Russian years ago and could remember phrases and words, but just couldn't remember the alphabet, so I gave it up as something I would never learn. Currently, I am working on learning Spanish. I learned basic French in school but didn't continue further because I didn't enjoy it and had more use for Spanish. Story 73. It would have to be a third language. I would choose Spanish. Spain is just 2 countries away from us. My wife lived there for about 5 years and she is quite fluent. Story 74. Portuguese. My partner is Brazilian, so being able to comfortably communicate with her family would be amazing. Story 75. Rest in peace to all bilingual individuals who already speak a second language fluently. You do not get this advantage easily. Story 76. Spanish. I live in Los Angeles and it would be wonderful. I speak French fluently, which strangely blocks my mind from learning Spanish properly, although I really try. Italian is also a beautiful language. Lastly, I would like to be able to speak Japanese. I just love the sounds of that language. Story 77. Italian. I mean to visit there, and I have a few Italian friends. I can already speak Spanish, English, some Catalan, and good French, so it would be a nice addition. Story 78. Spanish. I tried learning it but did not get very far. I want to travel to South America and be able to converse in the local language. Story 79. Mandarin and Japanese are languages I am currently learning. Japanese is my 6th language, and I am just beginning. Although I would love to finish learning Japanese, Mandarin is a language I cannot yet begin to understand. Story 80. Welsh, as it would allow me to move 100 miles west for a wider choice of jobs. My second language is not very helpful with my specific work skills, but there is a big market there. Story 81. For me, it is German. That would have saved me a lot of time and effort, also my parents' money, as my goal is to immigrate to Germany within at least 2.5 years. I would only have to focus on business and economically related knowledge, which is already a lot to take in. Although I have a knack for learning languages, I would be delighted if something like this actually happened. Story 82. Spanish. I love this language. I had a course in school to learn it, then I stopped. It is easy and straightforward. It also sounds great. I speak Arabic, English, French, and German, so it would be awesome for me. Story 83. Indonesian, because my girlfriend is Indonesian. However, I would not tell her, of course, so I can understand what she talks about with her friends and her mother. Story 84. Bengali, since my partner is from Kolkata. I would give anything to see the look on his face when I speak fluent Bengali. Story 85. If it's overnight, I'm going to take Chinese or Japanese, especially if reading and writing are included. I would never try to learn one of those because they are hard, especially writing. Russian would be a good choice too. Other Slavic languages would be easier to learn if you already know one. If I had to actually learn a language, I would probably choose Italian or Spanish. Italian because some of my family speak it and I don't, and Spanish because it is more widely spoken than Italian. Story 86. Spanish since it is my son's only language, and I know I will never be native level as long as I continue to speak English. My brain is just not wired that way, so my Spanish will always be non-native. Story 87. Probably Japanese. Both German and Japanese are on my radar for working there in the future. Germany is good for physics overall, and Japan because of Super Cameo Candy. However, I am already conversational in German, and it would make all my work so far pointless. Story 88. Probably Arabic. I am slowly learning Spanish, and being fluent would be amazing. However, Arabic is much harder, and no one would suspect that I know Arabic. Considering how often it is spoken in my city and country, I am sure it would come in very handy. Story 89. Probably Swedish or Danish. I have a career that is internationally needed, so one of those countries would be good for me coming from the United States. I would love to live in either country. The language barrier is the only thing keeping me from seriously pursuing it. Story 90. Korean, Spanish, or Thai. Korean because it would be good to listen to and watch things to understand it all. Visiting would be much easier. Spanish because it sounds great and would be really useful for general life, work, travel, and media and culture. Thai because I would immediately move to Bangkok and just enjoy life. Story 91. Tamil so that I could have proper conversations with my husband's family and talk to him in Tamil. That language is very hard to learn. Story 92. Spanish. I love Latin American countries, and even in the United States, Spanish is very popular. I would love to speak it fluently tomorrow morning if I could. Story 93. I want to have a Japanese girlfriend. There are reasons you might find surprising. You will understand in the next 10 years. Story 94. Well, for me, it would technically be a third language, but I would like to be able to speak Turkish. I am Mexican and Lebanese, so I am very fluent in both native languages. There are some similarities and interesting overlaps with Turkic languages, but I do not really understand Turkish, nor can I speak it. However, I have many friends from there and would like to know how to communicate if I were ever to visit Istanbul, for example. Story 95. I am a half Japanese animation fan. Therefore, I would choose Japanese. It is also one of the few languages I am genuinely interested in. Story 96. Either Spanish so I could more easily communicate with my coworkers and understand the lyrics to their music, or Italian so I could understand the lyrics to some Italian songs of rebellion and Italian punk and ska. Story 97. Italian. I love the Italian language and I go to Italy a lot. In fact, I am learning Italian at the moment or trying to. Story 98. I would love to speak fluent Italian. It is my favorite country to visit. I love the sound of the language, and it is the second language of the country where I am living now. Story 99. Can I choose my first language? I am not good at it and would like to become more effective at communicating with people in real life. Story 100. Spanish. I am in the United States, and there have been many instances where it would be beneficial and even more respectful to know the language to some extent. Story 101. Spanish. I live in southern Arizona and it really helps to be bilingual here, especially for people looking for any kind of job. I can understand some Spanish, but cannot speak much. Story 102. Hungarian. I already learned German and Italian. You never know when the Axis powers rejoin their forces again. Story 103. English. Now hear me out. I excel at writing but lack fluency when it comes to speaking, so I guess this is perfect for me. Story 104. My family comes from Hong Kong, and I am visiting for the first time for a week at the end of the month. I would love to be able to speak Cantonese, so I could genuinely connect with my family further afield and feel less like an uninformed tourist when I arrive. I also want to understand the culture more. Growing up, my grandfather, who was born in Hong Kong and moved to the United Kingdom in the 1960s, taught me and encouraged me to speak Cantonese when I was a child. However, as I got older, we lost touch and I never really pursued it, which I deeply regret. I also love the idea of walking into my local Chinese takeaway one day and demonstrating my language skills. Story 105. I think the most logical choice for me would be either Spanish or French, since both are spoken widely around the world. Another logical option would be Arabic, to understand the people who live in our city or neighborhood. Japanese would be interesting but has very limited use. The same applies to Greek. Story 106. Definitely Spanish for all the reasons noted above. I live in Southern California and am moving to Tucson, not too far from the border. I worked in restaurants for 35 years, so I know my foods, terms for ordering food, numbers, colors, and animals. On the late shift, everyone in the kitchen had animal nicknames. I just need to learn polite, mature Spanish in full sentences. Story 107. This may be a shock to you, but I am pretty sure that a good third of Reddit users already master 2 languages. Story 108. Japanese. I would hate that I have spent so long learning the language and all of a sudden I am native level, but it would be so helpful in my daily life. Story 109. Imagine someone trying to argue with you and you reply, vous débattez, mais je danse avec la vérité. Story 110. Latin gives you a foothold in all the Romance languages and makes them easier to learn and understand. Story 111. I would choose Chinese. I feel like it is developing rapidly, and there will come a time when it will be a necessity to know Chinese. Story 112. Spanish would be the most useful for me, but I would still choose French because I love the way it sounds. Story 113. I am a second-generation Greek living in the United States. My parents never spoke Greek to me because they were trying to learn English. All of my relatives live in Greece, and I cannot communicate with them. I have tried for years to learn Greek. When we visit, I have very basic speaking skills and can understand signs, but I am not fluent. Story 114. The Indian contractors at work sometimes speak in Hindi among themselves. I would love to interject fluently and join their conversation as a white person who has given no indication that he speaks their language. I can already see their disbelief, and I suspect I would be given a bunch of those delicious Indian sweets and samosas, excellent samosas. Story 115. English, I have a stutter, so it would be great to speak fluently for a change. I will approach this hypothetically by saying my first language was poor English. Story 116. I can already do that. If I were to choose a third language, it would not be very useful to me, and I am not sure which one I would pick or why. Story 117. Mandarin, why? I'm the most white boy you could imagine. Maybe if I speak Mandarin to my local Chinese friends, they'll add more wontons. I love wontons. Story 118. Arabic and Mandarin are the hardest languages for me to learn. I would not mind learning Japanese either, but I know enough to improve gradually. Tones and Arabic cursive are too difficult. Story 119. Spanish. It has been my experience working in the healthcare field that Latinos are very kind people. They are good to the core, family-oriented, have an amazing work ethic, and respect others. Also, because I live in the United States, many people speak Spanish. Story 120. Japanese. I love the culture, and they create excellent songs. It would be nice to understand them without relying on automatic translation, which cannot fully convey the writer's intended meaning. I hope to visit one day without being called a fool or outsider. Story 121. Maybe something like Wu Chinese because I like how it sounds, and it would be interesting to understand why some older Chinese poems were written the way they were. I would have chosen Hokkien if my grandmother were still alive because she does not speak Mandarin and only knows Hokkien. Story 122. Ancient Sumerian. We would be able to answer many questions about their culture and people if we had a native language speaker available. Story 123. Russian. It would be my fourth language though. Politics aside, I have always loved Eastern Europe and particularly the Russian language and food. It is astonishingly hard to learn, I never got farther than A2. Story 124. French. I have friends in France, and it would be great to be able to converse in their native language. Story 125. English, because I am studying translation to have a career and work abroad. Waking up to find out that I have mastered the language would make everything easier. At this rate, I will just need to get a legal degree and certifications. No more extra effort. Story 126. Sign language. I know many spoken languages, and I know the sign language alphabet, but I would love to learn the full language. I work in retail, and I know it will come in handy one day. Unfortunately, there are not many in-depth resources for learning it. Story 127. Absolutely Spanish. My grandmother never taught her children Spanish because her parents were from Mexico, and she thought it would be a disservice to them. As a result, her children never learned, and they were never able to teach us. I have a hard time with pronunciation and spelling because I am dyslexic and always failed Spanish. Knowing Spanish would have helped me in school, with jobs, and to learn other languages. Because of all that, I took sign language instead and flourished, but it has been so long since high school that I have forgotten almost everything. Story 128. Probably Hindi, so I could talk to many people I work with in their native or near-native language. Many of them also speak Telugu, but I think even they know some Hindi as well. Story 129. Japanese culture is amazing, and the language is difficult to learn for English speakers. Story 130. My grandmother, who is purely Polish, moved here to Australia when she was 5 years old and lost her native language. I would love to have a linguistic connection to my heritage. Story 131. Spanish would be the most practical for an American. I am learning German, so completing that would be great. French or Italian would be fun because I really like both of those countries. Story 132. Irish Gaelic. Because I have always dreamed of going to Ireland, and I hear the people are charming and precious. Story 133. Japanese. I would love to watch anime without reading subtitles or waiting for the dubbed release. Story 134. French. I actually could speak it as a child when we lived in Quebec. As one of Canada's official languages, it would be nice to be totally fluent in it again. Story 135. Arabic. I prefer Egyptian dialect, but I am not going to be picky. I assume I can also read it. Mine is for religious and cultural reasons. Story 136. Bosnian. I wanted to communicate more easily with my wife's family and navigate more easily when visiting. Story 137. Spanish would be the most useful because 95% of the people I hear speaking a language I do not know are speaking Spanish. Story 138. A fourth language in my case because I already have a main language, a mother tongue, and no Japanese. Probably Latin just for the mystical and cool factor, or probably French so I can sound posh in front of my cousins. Story 139. German, and I don't have a reason. Wait, I have a reason. Actually, I want to know how I sound while speaking fluent German. Story 140. Spanish. Because then I can learn many Spanish dialects from different continents. That's why I enjoy speaking Arabic. It has many dialects, and each one is unique and challenging for non-native speakers. Story 141. Russian or Italian, I don't mind either of them. Russian because I like their literature. The translated works mostly lose their depth. Italian because I love how it sounds. Story 142. Italian, and then I would move to Italy. Anything to leave Australia. Never going to be able to build a life here. Story 143. Icelandic. There are almost no educational resources in Polish to learn it. I have a plan to move there if Portugal and France, both places on my list of potential destinations, become too radicalized and right-wing conservatives take power. I am definitely not staying in Poland. Story 144. French. I am Canadian and would love to be fluent in both English and French like my husband is, although he is from France. Story 145. Spanish. Living in California, it is the most useful second language to have. Bonus. My Mexican boss would no longer be able to speak negatively about me and my coworkers right in front of us without being fully understood. Story 146. Depends, I already speak a few languages a bit, so I would choose something I cannot quite grasp, like French or Chinese. Story 147. If I could also read the language, Japanese, solely to read one piece without anything getting mixed up in translation, directly from the author's words. Story 148. Welsh. I have always wanted to be able to sing in Welsh, but sadly, learning languages is not very easy for me. Story 149. I already speak 2 languages fluently, so this would be my 3rd language. I would pick Japanese or Korean, but I am leaning more towards Korean because I recently got into Korean pop music and want to understand the lyrics. Story 150. Honestly, I would appreciate it if ancient Greek could be downloaded into my brain without me struggling through textbooks. Story 151. By saying, I have been trying to learn it on and off for years. I want to be able to communicate effectively with my wife's family. Story 152. Spanish. I have lived over 80% of my life close to the border in the southwestern United States and only know a few words and phrases. I was certainly embarrassed in Spain earlier this year. Story 153. Mandarin. I work in a multinational company, and we have many Chinese people. We communicate with them in English. They talk with each other in Chinese. I would like to understand them without their knowledge for a while and then surprise them. Story 154. C#. I am going to study game design as part of my high school choice, and they use C# there. I am procrastinating learning it right now as I type this. Story 155. Inuvialuktun is my mother's native language and is critically endangered. I live hundreds of kilometers from most knowledge keepers of the language. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.